The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was silent, the kind of silence that came before history changed. Across the vast chamber, beneath banners of 100 species, the most powerful leaders in the galaxy gathered for what they called the final deliberation. Holographic stars rotated slowly above the central podium, highlighting a single blue and white sphere, Earth, the home of humanity, the problem they could no longer ignore. "Order, counselors, order," boomed the voice of Chancellor Urix, a towering reptilian elder who had presided over the Union for nearly 3 centuries. "We are here to decide the fate of the human species. The proposal for exile is on the table. You know the charges." Every representative present did know them. Humanity, too aggressive, too ambitious, too unpredictable. They had risen from a single world and spread across the stars faster than anyone had expected. In just 2 centuries of faster-than-light travel, they had colonized worlds the older races thought unreachable. They had terraformed dead rocks into living gardens. They had broken treaties, yes, but they had also saved lives, ended wars, and forged peace between species that once hated each other. And that was the problem. "They cannot be trusted," hissed Counselor Vesh of the Threx Dominion, his crimson scales glinting beneath the lights. "They speak of peace with one hand while building weapons with the other. They meddle in conflicts that are not their own. Their fleets grow too quickly. Their influence spreads too far." Counselor Aaron of the Selari Confederacy raised a hand. "And yet, without their ships, the frontier colonies would have starved. Without their engineers, the Rift Gate would still be unfinished. Without their sacrifices, the Vorton Plague would have wiped out half this chamber. Are we now to punish them for being useful?" The hall erupted in murmurs, agreement from some, anger from others. It had been this way for months, endless debates, accusations, and counterarguments. Every species in the galaxy had an opinion about humanity. Some saw them as saviors, others saw them as a threat. But no one could ignore them. Far away on a small planet called Earth, humanity was watching too. In city squares and orbital stations, in colony outposts and deep space ships, screens displayed the Council's debate in real time. Billions watched with clenched jaws and silent rage. They had known this day would come. It had been building for years, the whispers of distrust, the restrictions, the threats of sanctions. On the balcony of the United Earth Government building in Geneva, President Miriam Hale stood with a group of senior officials, their faces grim. "They've already decided," she said softly, watching the broadcast. "This vote is just a formality." General Marcus Reyes, head of Earth's Defense Fleet, nodded. "They're afraid of us, and fear always leads to exile." "Then let them be afraid," murmured Dr. Evelyn Park, lead scientist of the Terran Expansion Project. "We have what we need. We don't have to wait for their permission anymore." There was silence for a moment, the weight of centuries pressing on their shoulders. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Union for only 184 years, a blink of an eye by cosmic standards. But in that time, they had changed everything. And now, the galaxy wanted them gone. "They think exile will break us," President Hale whispered. "They have no idea." Back in the council hall, the vote approached. Chancellor Urix raised his staff. "Councilors, we have debated long enough. The proposal before you is as follows. Humanity is to be exiled from Union space. All Terran colonies are to be dismantled. All human ships are to be denied docking rights. Their membership in the Galactic Union will be revoked permanently." The chamber filled with tension so thick it felt like gravity itself had doubled. One by one, the votes began to tally. Green for exile, red for mercy. Vesh, green. Threx Dominion, green. Solari Confederacy, red. Urix's own people, green. The votes continued, slowly, relentlessly. It would be hours before the final result was confirmed, but it didn't matter. The outcome was already certain. Humanity would be exiled, their place among the stars stripped away. And yet, something strange was happening. As the council argued over procedural details, reports began to trickle in. A strange energy surge was detected in Sol's system, then another from the colonies on Kepler 442b, then from the orbital shipyards near Proxima Centauri. At first they dismissed it as coincidence, then the messages started. Human trade fleets have departed without notice. All Terran embassies are being evacuated. The Earth relay network has gone dark. Are they leaving? Asked Counselor Aaron, his voice trembling with disbelief. They can't be, Vesh spat. The vote isn't even finished. But they were. By the time the council concluded its session, hours later, the stars near Sol were empty. Earth's orbital stations were gone. Their colonies were dark, shipyards abandoned. Every human vessel, every satellite, every outpost had vanished. Even the beacon that once marked humanity's capital world had been shut down. A single transmission arrived at the Council's network, a short message sent from deep space. You do not have to exile us. We were never yours to banish. We will find our own way. On Earth, the skies burned with the light of departure. Thousands of ships, colony carriers, arc vessels, deep space cruisers rose from the atmosphere like fireflies leaving a dying world. People stood on rooftops and mountain peaks, watching their species leave the cradle behind forever. There was fear, yes, and sadness, but above all there was pride. We were born here, President Hale said in her final broadcast. But we are not bound here. The stars belong to all who dare to reach them, and we will reach farther than anyone ever dreamed. Humanity did not wait for permission. They did not beg for mercy. They did not ask for forgiveness. Before the vote was over, they were already gone. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of map space, the first human ship jumped into the unknown, toward a future no council could control, no empire could dictate. The galaxy had voted to exile humanity. But humanity had already exiled itself. The departure of humanity was not chaos, it was calculated. It had been planned, prepared, and quietly built over decades. To the rest of the galaxy, it seemed like a sudden decision born of anger or pride. But to those who knew the truth, it was always part of the plan. Humanity had never trusted the Galactic Council's promises. They had seen too many broken treaties, too many betrayals, too many veiled threats. And so, long before the vote was even proposed, they had begun building their escape, Project Dawn. It had started in secret deep beneath the sands of Mars, in facilities buried so far below the surface that even the most advanced sensors could not detect them. There, engineers and scientists, the best minds Earth had ever produced, worked on ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen. These were not warships, nor cargo freighters, nor colonial transports. They were Orcs, massive self-sustaining starfarers capable of traveling beyond the known edges of the galaxy without resupply or communication. Each was a city in itself, designed to carry millions of people across the endless dark. For years, governments had poured resources into Project Dawn while calling it civilian deep space research. Entire industries had been built around it under false names. Every major city on Earth had contributed to its creation. Children learned about frontier science without ever realizing they were preparing for their own departure. Even the colonies, once proud members of the Union, had quietly aligned their development with Project Dawn's secret needs. Humanity had not planned to leave the galaxy, but they had prepared for the day when they might have to. The day after the Council announced the exile vote, that plan moved from theory to reality. From Mars to Titan, from Kepler 62 to the outer edges of Proxima, thousands of ships lit their engines. Families packed what they could. Scientists uploaded entire libraries of human knowledge into data cores. Cities emptied. Spaceports glowed with light as millions boarded ships bound for the unknown. The news spread fast. Galactic news networks replayed the images over and over. Oceans of ships lifting from Earth's skis, massive fleets forming up beyond the moon, colony worlds sending final transmissions before going dark. Across the galaxy, governments and military leaders stared in disbelief. "They're really leaving," whispered High Chancellor Urix as he watched the broadcasts from the council hall. "Before we even finished the vote." "Where will they go?" asked Councillor Aaron. "Everywhere," replied Vesh bitterly, "and nowhere we can follow." On Earth, President Miriam Hale stood in the final command center of Project Dawn, deep beneath the ruins of an abandoned spaceport. Around her, hollow screens showed the progress of the Exodus. Hundreds of fleets forming, arcs readying for their first jumps, colonies signaling their readiness. It was the greatest migration in human history, and perhaps the greatest in the history of the galaxy itself. "Are we ready?" she asked quietly. General Reyes nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be. The Exodus fleet is assembled. The first wave launches in 6 hours." "And the colonies?" she pressed. "Coordinated and moving on schedule. The inner systems have already cleared their population centers. Outer rim settlements will follow by the end of the week." President Hale exhaled slowly. "Then this is it." It was not triumph she felt, nor even relief, but a deep, aching sorrow. Earth had been humanity's home for millennia. It had seen empires rise and fall, wars and revolutions, love and loss. It was where their story had begun. And now they were leaving it behind. But there was no other choice. Before departure, a final transmission was sent from Earth to the Galactic Council. It was not angry or bitter. It was not a declaration of war or vengeance. It was a farewell. "We thank the Union for the years we shared, but humanity's destiny was never meant to be confined. We choose to walk our own path, not as exiles, but as explorers. We do not leave out of hatred, but because we know we were meant for more than the limits you set for us. If one day we meet again, we hope it will be as equals, not as enemies." The message ended with the emblem of Earth, a single blue planet, small and fragile against the backdrop of stars, and then silence. The first wave of ships launched at dawn, their engines burning gold against the blackness of space. Entire continents watched them rise, their light cutting through clouds and night alike. It was a sight that stirred something deep in the human soul, a mixture of sadness and hope, grief and determination. Children held onto their parents as they left their homes for the last time. Old men and women pressed their hands against the glass of starship windows, watching the planet of their birth grow smaller and smaller. Soldiers saluted as the fleet departed, their tears hidden behind visors. And as the last ship broke free of Earth's gravity, a quiet realization settled over humanity. They were no longer citizens of a single world. They were now a species of the stars. The arcs moved in silence, their engines humming as they slipped into the darkness between suns. They traveled in great convoys at first, staying close as they cleared the edge of known space. But soon they would scatter, some toward distant star clusters, others into the unexplored void. Humanity's destiny would no longer be bound to a single system, a single star, or even a single galaxy. And though they did not know what awaited them, danger or wonder, despair or discovery, they carried with them something far greater than any council decree. They carried hope. Back in the council hall, as the last transmission from Earth faded into static, Chancellor Urix sat in stunned silence. "They're gone," he said quietly. "They didn't wait for us to exile them." "No," Councillor Aaron murmured, "they exiled us." Because even as the most powerful species in the galaxy debated humanity's fate, humanity had already chosen its own. The leaders voted to exile Earth, but Earth had already left the room. And somewhere beyond the horizon of known space, the story of humanity was beginning again. At first, the galaxy celebrated. When news spread that humanity had vanished into the void before the vote had even concluded, many worlds declared a day of victory. Speeches filled the airways. Politicians boasted about how the Union had secured peace, and old enemies congratulated one another on their shared triumph. No longer would the unpredictable humans challenge the balance of power. No longer would they interfere in the affairs of older, wiser civilizations. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the celebration began to sour. The galaxy had expected peace. What came instead was silence, a silence that grew heavier with each passing cycle. Trade routes that had once hummed with Terran cargo ships fell quiet. Ports that had been bustling with human merchants now stood half-empty. Entire industries that relied on Terran engineering, medicine, and technology began to slow, then falter. It happened gradually at first, a delayed shipment here, a malfunctioning reactor there. But soon the cracks were impossible to ignore. The Kelari Confederacy was the first to notice. Their colony on Yaris 4 suffered a reactor failure, nothing catastrophic, just a problem they had always relied on Terran engineers to fix. But with the humans gone, no one knew how to repair the system. Attempts to reverse engineer the technology ended in disaster. Within months, the colony had to be abandoned. "It's temporary," Councillor Vesh insisted in a public address. "We are capable of adapting without them." But deep down, even he knew the truth. The galaxy had become dependent on humanity far more than anyone wanted to admit. Beyond technology, something deeper was missing. Human diplomats, known for their relentless optimism and reckless courage, had often brokered peace between species that would otherwise have gone to war. Now, those fragile truces began to fray. Old rivalries reignited. Border skirmishes erupted in regions that had been stable for decades. The first major conflict came between the Threx Dominion and the Lethari Combine, longtime enemies kept in check by Terran mediation. Without human negotiators shuttling between capitals, accusations turned to threats, and threats to battle. Within 6 months of humanity's departure, the largest war in a century had broken out. On the floor of the Galactic Council, panic began to creep in. "We must intervene," shouted Councillor Aaron, who had voted against Exile. "We are losing everything we built with them." Urix, the High Chancellor, was silent. The once proud leader now spent most meetings staring at holographic projections, his eyes heavy with regret. "We were so afraid of their strength," he finally said, "that we never saw how much of it held us together." Meanwhile, the cultural void was just as profound. Humans had always been prolific storytellers, musicians, and artists. They had filled the galaxy with laughter and arguments, with questions that no one else dared to ask. They had built monuments on alien worlds, shared their food and festivals, and forged friendships across species lines. Now, those spaces felt empty. On the Selari homeworld, the Grand Theater of Myria closed its doors. Half its performances had been human plays. On Threxian trading stations, shops that once sold Terran coffee, wine, and literature went bankrupt. Even the once bustling marketplaces of the galactic core felt hollow. "They made the galaxy feel alive," said a Lethari scholar in an interview. "They annoyed us, frustrated us, confused us, but they also inspired us. Without them, we are less than we were." It was not only ordinary citizens who felt the absence. Scientists, explorers, and engineers found themselves staring at their projects in despair. Humanity had pushed the frontiers of discovery further than anyone thought possible. They had mapped regions of space that others feared to enter. They had colonized worlds once thought inhospitable, and they had solved problems the rest of the galaxy considered unsolvable. Now exploration missions stalled. The great expansion into the Perseus frontier, once a joint Union project, ground to a halt without Terran crews. No one else was willing to take the same risks, to bet everything on the chance of success. The stars suddenly felt further away than they had in centuries. And somewhere, buried beneath the politics and pride, a cold realization began to spread. The galaxy was smaller without humanity. 1 year after the Exile vote, the Council convened an emergency session. It was the first time in decades that every member attended in person. The agenda was simple: the human absence crisis. The situation is deteriorating, Chancellor Urix admitted before the assembly. Trade is collapsing, wars are spreading, innovation has slowed by nearly 50%, our alliances are weakening, our expansion efforts are at a standstill. It is their fault, Vesh growled. They abandoned us. Aaron slammed his hand on the table. They left because we pushed them away. We called them dangerous, arrogant, reckless, but they were the reason we thrived. A heavy silence followed. It was the first time many of them had truly faced the truth. They had not exiled humanity. They had exiled themselves from everything humanity had brought with them. Their ingenuity, their courage, their relentless drive to make things better. Rumors began to circulate, whispered in back rooms and shadowed corridors. Freighters disappearing at the edge of mapped space. Stations reporting sightings of ships unlike any known design. Signals detected from beyond the galactic rim, human signals. It was said that humanity was building something vast out there, something new. They are not gone, Aaron said quietly, watching the data scroll past his desk late one night. They are just beyond our reach. And that thought terrified the Council more than anything else. Because if humanity was building something beyond the galaxy's borders, it meant they no longer needed the Union at all. And if one day they chose to return, no one knew what they would return as. The galaxy had imagined that without humans, life would go on as before. Instead, it had become slower, smaller, weaker, and lonelier. The vote that was meant to secure their future had instead shown them how much of it was tied to the very species they had cast out. For now, they could only watch the stars and wonder, where had humanity gone? What were they becoming? And most frightening of all, would they ever come back? Because deep in their hearts, even the most arrogant of counselors now understood a bitter truth. The galaxy needed humanity far more than humanity had ever needed the galaxy. The first real attempt to reach humanity came 3 years after their departure. By then, the galaxy was not the same. Trade networks had collapsed to half their former strength. Frontier colonies were shrinking instead of growing. Entire civilizations had turned inward, abandoning exploration and diplomacy to focus on their own survival. The Galactic Council met in an emergency session, not to boast or threaten this time, but to admit a painful truth. We cannot continue like this, Chancellor Urix said, his deep voice weary and aged. Without the Terrans, the Union is falling apart. No one argued anymore. Even Counselor Vesh, once humanity's loudest critic, remained silent. His own empire had suffered the worst. Industries that relied on Terran innovation were dying. Their fleets struggled to navigate uncharted regions, and their citizens were restless. They were reckless, Aaron said softly, but they were also the reason the impossible became possible. We used to think they were too much, too ambitious, too bold, too impatient. Now, without them, we see how much we depended on those very qualities. The chamber was quiet. For years, no one had dared speak such words aloud. Now they felt more like confessions than statements. We must find them, Urix said firmly, before it is too late. The first step was communication. The Council sent hundreds of signals into the void, coded messages, apologies, offers of alliance. They transmitted on every frequency, in every language known to humanity. But there was no reply. Then they sent ships. Dozens of exploration fleets set course for the edge of mapped space, searching for any trace of the humans. Some never returned. Those that did brought back stories of ghost signals, empty relay stations, and strange new structures orbiting distant stars. "They're out there," one Threxian admiral reported. "We can feel their presence, but they do not want to be found." The Council refused to give up. They doubled their efforts, sending envoys and emissaries deeper into the unknown. One expedition discovered a derelict human outpost near the Perseus Edge. It was deserted, but the technology they found was centuries ahead of anything the Union possessed. Even in exile, humanity had continued to evolve, faster and further than anyone had imagined. "They are building something," Aaron said during a closed council session, "something greater than what we ever offered them." Meanwhile, among ordinary citizens across the galaxy, something unexpected was happening. A quiet longing for humanity's return was spreading. Once mocked and feared, humans were now spoken of with respect, even admiration. On a Selari colony world, a group of scientists founded the Order of the Horizon, dedicated to studying human innovation and philosophy. "They taught us that limits are illusions," their manifesto read. "We honor them by refusing to accept the boundaries others place upon us." On a Threxian trade hub, merchants began selling goods labeled Terran style, trying to imitate the designs humans had once brought to the galaxy. On countless planets, schools began teaching Terran history, not as a warning, but as an example of what courage and curiosity could achieve. It was becoming clear. Humanity had left the Union, but their spirit had not. It lived on in those who once despised them. The Council's desperation grew. "We must send a delegation," Urix proposed. "Not just ships, ambassadors. We must go to them with humility." And so, a fleet of 20 ships, a coalition of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, set out on the longest mission in Union history. Their destination was the Perseus Rim, the last known region where human signals had been detected. The journey took months. They passed through dead systems and abandoned relay stations, past derelict mining colonies and strange artificial rings orbiting empty stars. Everywhere they looked, they saw signs of human presence, but always old, always distant. It was as if humanity was always one step ahead. Finally, at the edge of known space, they found something that stopped them cold. It was not a planet or a base. It was a structure, a colossal ring of silver and black metal encircling a star. Larger than anything the galaxy had ever built, it pulsed with blue light and energy beyond their understanding. And carved into its surface, visible even from orbit, were two words written in Terran standard. New Dawn. The delegation was stunned. Humanity had not just left, they had built a new civilization. A network of habitats and megastructures stretched across the system, forming a society that was clearly thriving. Fleets larger than anything the Union had ever fielded patrolled the region, their ships sleek and powerful, their technology far beyond what was once possible. "We were fools," whispered Counselor Aaron, staring at the sight. "We thought Exile would weaken them. It made them unstoppable." The fleet hailed the nearest human vessel. "This is the Galactic Council delegation," Chancellor Urix said, his voice trembling. "We come in peace. We wish to speak." There was silence. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then finally a human voice replied, calm, measured, and strangely cold. "We know why you are here, but understand this. We did not leave because you exiled us. We left because your vision was too small. The galaxy was a cage, and we refused to remain inside it." The transmission ended. No meeting followed. No invitation came. Humanity had spoken, and they had no interest in returning. The Council fleet retreated, hearts heavy with the weight of their realization. The galaxy had believed that exile was punishment. It was not. It had been liberation not for the Union but for humanity. As they traveled back toward the core, Chancellor Urix stared out into the dark and whispered, "We tried to decide their fate, but they were always beyond our reach." And for the first time in galactic history, the older civilizations understood a truth that humans had always known. Power is not given. It is taken. And destiny is not decided by votes. It is forged by those who dare to dream bigger than the universe itself. In their absence, humanity had become something more than a member of the Union. They had become a force, vast, unknowable, and unstoppable. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, one question haunted every mind in the galaxy. If they ever decide to return, will they come back as friends or as gods? 5 years had passed since the delegation's journey to the edge of known space. 5 years since they had seen the impossible, humanity's colossal structures, their new fleets, their thriving civilization beyond the stars. And in all that time, not a single word had come from them. No messages, no envoys, no ships. They had vanished back into the void, leaving the Galactic Council with only silence and regret. But silence can be more terrifying than war. And soon, the galaxy began to notice small, unsettling things. It started on the frontier, tiny, unimportant colonies at the edges of Union space. A mining station here, a research outpost there. They would send routine transmissions one day, and then nothing. No distress calls, no warnings, just silence. Search teams would arrive weeks later and find them abandoned, everything intact, but the people gone. At first the council blamed pirates. Then they blamed rival powers. But deep down, every leader felt the same chilling suspicion. Humanity was watching. The rumors spread like wildfire. Freighters spoke of seeing ships slip silently through dark space, vessels without identification, without signatures, moving like ghosts. Patrol fleets reported strange sensor readings, sudden power losses, and encounters with unknown technology. In one sector, an entire Threxian battleship simply disappeared from its patrol route. Its last transmission was a single sentence. "They are here." Fear began to spread in places where arrogance had once lived. The same species who had voted to exile humanity now whispered nervously in council halls and command centers. And the question they all feared to ask out loud was the one that kept them awake at night. What if humanity hadn't left forever? Chancellor Urix stared at the reports on his desk, his hands trembling. He had been in power long enough to see countless crises, wars, plagues, economic collapses, but none had unsettled him like this. Because this was not an enemy they could negotiate with. It was not a rebellion they could crush. This was the ghost of their greatest mistake, rising from the dark. "They are probing us," he said during a closed council session, "studying our defenses, testing our resolve." "Or warning us," countered Counselor Aaron. "They could have attacked already, they could have destroyed everything, but they haven't. Maybe they just want us to know they're still watching." Vesh slammed his clawed fist against the table. "This is intimidation. We cannot let them believe they can return on their terms. We must show strength." "Strength," Aaron's voice was sharp. "Strength is what started this mess. Strength is why they left. Maybe, just maybe, we need humility now." The room fell silent. No one had an answer. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's greatest powers felt small. Beyond the Council's control, panic grew among the people. Prophets and cults declared humanity's return was the beginning of a new era. Traders and mercenaries swore they had seen fleets the size of planets lurking in the void. On dozens of worlds, monuments once built to celebrate the exile of humanity were torn down by crowds chanting, "Bring them back." Even the military was changing. Fleets began redesigning their ships, mimicking Terran engine styles and adopting their tactics. Scientists rushed to replicate human technology, though most of their attempts ended in failure. In their desperation, the same species who had once called humanity reckless now tried to become them. But there was one truth they could not deny: they were still far behind. Humanity had outgrown them. Then one day the silence broke. It happened in the Orcs sector, a quiet, unimportant region near the Perseus Rim. A listening station picked up a transmission unlike any they had ever seen. The signal was encrypted, ancient in format but undeniably Terran. It carried only 4 words. "We have not forgotten." The message spread across the galaxy within hours. News networks, governments, and militaries all reacted with panic and awe. The council convened an emergency session, but no one knew what to say. Was it a warning, a declaration, a promise? "Not forgotten," Urix repeated, packing the chamber. "Does it mean vengeance, retribution?" "Or justice," Aaron replied. Perhaps they haven't forgotten who we were or what we could become. Weeks later, another signal appeared. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a set of coordinates deep in the uncharted void, far beyond the reach of any known star lane. The council debated endlessly whether it was a trap, a peace offer, or something else entirely. But in the end, they had no choice. They had to go. The expedition fleet that departed was the largest in centuries, 50 warships, 20 research vessels, and dozens of diplomats. They followed the coordinates for weeks through empty space, guided only by faint traces of Terran beacon signals. And then, without warning, they saw it. A city in the stars. It wasn't a planet or a station. It was something far greater. Massive ring-shaped habitats stretched across an artificial sun, surrounded by swarms of ships and structures larger than moons. It was a civilization built not on a world but around one, a new home for humanity. And there, waiting for them at the edge of the system, was a fleet. Hundreds of ships, elegant, powerful, and utterly silent, moved into formation. No weapons were fired. No threats were made. They simply watched as the council ships approached. "They want us to see," Aaron whispered. "They want us to understand how far they've come." A transmission came through, broadcast in every known language. The voice was human, but deeper now, older, the voice of a people who had grown beyond their past. "We remember the vote, we remember the fear, we remember the exile, and we remember how you doubted us. We are not returning to beg for acceptance. We are not returning for forgiveness. We are returning because the stars are ours too, and this time we do not ask, we decide." The message ended. Silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence before something vast and unstoppable. Back in the council hall, no one spoke for a long time. Every leader felt the weight of what was coming. Humanity was no longer a distant memory. They were not lost wanderers or bitter exiles. They were builders, pioneers, and now, perhaps, rulers. "They're not just coming back," Urix whispered. "They're coming back changed." And though fear rippled through the chamber, there was something else there too, something few of them dared to name: hope. Because if humanity had returned, perhaps they had not come to destroy. Perhaps they had come to lead the galaxy somewhere it had never been before. But one thing was certain. The shadows were no longer shadows. Humanity had stepped back into the light, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy held its breath. Across every star system, from the glittering spires of the Solari worlds to the deep mining colonies of the Threx Dominion, every screen, every comm relay, every listening array played the same message, the one humanity had sent. "We are not returning to beg for acceptance. We are not returning for forgiveness. We are returning because the stars are ours too, and this time we do not ask, we decide." It was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was something far more unsettling, a simple truth spoken with absolute certainty. Humanity was back, and they were no longer asking for permission. The Galactic Council met in emergency session less than 12 hours later. The great chamber was filled with tension, so thick it felt like the air itself was trembling. For once, no one argued, no one shouted. Every leader in the room knew that the decisions they made in the coming days would shape the future of the galaxy forever. "What do they want?" asked Counselor Vesh, his voice cracking despite his attempt to sound strong. "Are they declaring themselves rulers? Are we to surrender?" "They haven't threatened us," Counselor Aaron replied calmly. "They've simply reminded us that they are no longer beneath us." "And yet they appear with fleets that could erase us from existence," Vesh spat. "They are demonstrating power. That is a threat in itself." Urix, the aging chancellor, raised a trembling claw for silence. "It is not power they are showing," he said quietly. "It is choice. The choice we denied them when we voted to exile their kind, and now they are giving us a choice." The council sent an official message to the Terran fleet, requesting dialogue. The reply came almost immediately: a set of coordinates deep in the neutral Hestara system, and a single word. Come. No one dared refuse. A fleet of ambassadors, diplomats, and envoys from every major power departed within days. Their ships slipped through the void under the shadow of something larger than fear. It was the weight of history. When they arrived in the Hestara system, they found a scene unlike anything they had prepared for. A colossal station, larger than any space city the Union had ever built, floated in the darkness. Human banners, simple and white, bearing the symbol of a rising star, hung from its towers. Waiting for them at the docking bay was a delegation of humans. They were different now, taller, stronger, carrying themselves with a quiet confidence that spoke of centuries of progress packed into a handful of years. They greeted their former rivals with polite smiles, but their eyes told a deeper story. We remember everything. The main hall of the Terran station was vast and awe-inspiring, filled with technologies the Union barely understood. Gravity shifted effortlessly between zones. Walls pulsed with living light. Holographic maps of entire star clusters floated above the floor. And at the center, on a raised platform, stood a woman who introduced herself as Admiral Leora Quinn, spokesperson for the Terran Coalition. She was calm, her voice soft, but every word she spoke carried the weight of something unshakable. "You voted to exile us," she began, "and we left before the vote was even over. You sought to limit us, and we surpassed your reach. You believed you could define our future, but we wrote it ourselves." The chamber was silent. No one dared interrupt her. "For decades, we tried to be part of your union. We tried to adapt, to compromise, to fit into a system that was never built for us. But our nature, our hunger to grow, to explore, to be more, was treated as a crime. So we chose another path. And now we return not as petitioners, but as equals." Aaron stood, bowing his head slightly. "Then let us begin again, as equals, as you say. What do you ask of us?" Admiral Quinn studied him for a long moment. "We ask for nothing, but we offer terms. Consider them carefully." The terms were simple, and yet they changed everything. First, the Terran Coalition would not rejoin the Galactic Union. It would stand apart, sovereign and independent. Second, all species would be free to travel, trade, and collaborate with humanity, but none would rule over them. Third, the Council would end its policies restricting exploration and expansion. The stars would belong to any who dared to reach them. And last, any future decisions affecting the fate of a species would require unanimous consent. No more exiles, no more forced judgments. "If these terms are accepted," Quinn concluded, "then a new era begins, not one of domination but of coexistence. But understand this, if they are rejected, humanity will not wage war. We will simply continue forward without you, and the galaxy will watch as you are left behind." The room was silent. Some envoys looked relieved, others looked terrified. Vesh stood, his voice shaking with anger. "These terms are an ultimatum. They are dictating how we govern ourselves." "They are reminding us that they no longer need us," Aaron replied quietly. "And if we refuse, they will go on without us, and we will become irrelevant." In that moment the truth was undeniable. The galaxy was no longer the center of power. Humanity was, and they had offered peace not as an olive branch, but as a gift they could just as easily withhold. The Council returned to the core worlds to debate. Weeks turned into months. Old rivalries resurfaced. Some species argued that humanity's terms were fair, that they had earned their independence and their respect. Others claimed that agreeing to them would mean surrendering the Union's authority forever. But slowly, one by one, voices began to change. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity's technology was centuries ahead. Their colonies were thriving beyond the edge of the galaxy. Their fleets could not be matched. And most importantly, the galaxy needed them, more now than ever before. When the final vote was cast, it was unanimous. The Council accepted the Terran terms. On the day the agreement was signed, Admiral Quinn stood once again before the council. "This is not an end," she said softly. "It is a beginning. Together, we can shape a galaxy worthy of all who call it home, but never again will any one species decide the fate of another." And for the first time since the Exile, the leaders of the galaxy felt something they had not felt in generations: hope. They had tried to exile humanity. Now they stood beside them, humbled and wiser. The message had been heard. The lesson had been learned. The stars no longer belonged to the old order. They belonged to all who had the courage to reach for them, and none more than the humans who had once been cast out and now returned as masters of their own destiny. The signing of the agreement was not the end. It was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, as word spread that the Galactic Council had accepted humanity's terms, an era was ending and a new one was being born. The fear and resentment that had once defined the relationship between humans and the other species began to fade, replaced by curiosity, respect, and something deeper: hope. But even hope was not enough to erase the scars of the past. The memory of the exile still lingered like a wound that had never healed. Humanity remembered the vote that tried to cast them out. The galaxy remembered the decades they spent without them, and how that absence had nearly broken everything. Now, with the future uncertain, both sides faced a question that would define their destinies. Could they truly walk forward together? The answer, humanity decided, was yes, but it would not be easy. The Terran coalition did not return to the Union's heartworlds as conquerors or rulers. They returned as partners. Human engineers began collaborating with alien scientists on projects once thought impossible: planet-sized energy grids, faster-than-light communication networks, and new forms of life-sustaining habitats. Human explorers joined alien crews in mapping the uncharted void beyond the Perseus Rim. Artists and thinkers from every world shared their stories, their philosophies, their dreams. And slowly, the galaxy began to change. For the first time, the Council passed a resolution guaranteeing the rights of every sentient species, no matter how small or new. Exploration was no longer controlled by ancient bureaucracies, but driven by open collaboration. Trade routes expanded beyond their old borders, guided by Terran technology. Even education transformed. Human universities welcomed alien students, and alien academies opened their doors to humans. In every way that mattered, the galaxy was healing. But there were still those who doubted. On some worlds, extremists whispered that humanity's return was a trick, that their power would one day crush the Union. Others feared that human influence would grow too strong, that their technology and ideas would overshadow all others. These fears led to protests, sabotage, even acts of violence. Yet every time the darkness tried to rise, something remarkable happened. Humans stood beside those who opposed them. They offered aid to planets that refused their ships. They defended colonies that once voted to exile them. They treated their former enemies not with vengeance, but with compassion. Admiral Leora Quinn spoke often to the galaxy in those years. Her speeches were simple, but they carried the weight of centuries of pain and pride. "We remember the day you voted to cast us out," she said in one broadcast. "We remember how it felt to be unwanted, and that is why we will never do the same to anyone else. The lesson we learned from exile is that no one should face the stars alone." Those words became the motto of a new age. No one faces the stars alone. Decades passed, and the memory of exile became history. The once fractured galaxy was now more united than it had ever been. Humanity's star cities, vast, living habitats orbiting distant suns, became hubs of learning and diplomacy. Alien children grew up watching Terran holodramas and learning Earth's history. Human children studied the philosophies of the Selari and the mathematics of the Threx. Together, they built fleets capable of crossing the intergalactic void. Together, they seeded worlds that would bloom with life for millennia. Together, they dared to look beyond the Milky Way and dream of what lay beyond. The vote that once tried to limit humanity's destiny had instead become the spark that set the galaxy free. On the 100th anniversary of the Exile vote, a great gathering was held in the Galactic Council Hall, rebuilt now as a symbol of unity, not power. Leaders from every known species attended. So did millions of citizens, watching from across the stars. At the center of the chamber, beneath banners that now bore the insignia of both the Union and the Terran Coalition, Admiral Quinn, now old, her hair silver and her face lined with time, stood to speak one final time. "Once you voted to cast us out," she said softly, "and we left before the vote was over. We left because we believed we were meant for something more, and we were right. But what we learned, what we all learned, is that we were never meant to walk this path alone." She paused, letting her gaze travel over the faces of dozens of species, some she had once called enemies, now her allies. Exile taught us pain, it taught us anger, but it also taught us strength and patience and empathy. And in the end, it gave us something no victory ever could: understanding. We learned that destiny is not about conquering the stars, it's about sharing them. The chamber was silent for a long time. Then slowly, applause began to rise, first from the human delegation, then from the Selari, then from the Threx, and then from everyone. It was the sound of a galaxy not celebrating a single species, but celebrating what they had become together. Later that night, as Admiral Quinn looked out from the balcony of the council hall at the stars beyond, she felt tears in her eyes. Humanity had come so far from a single small world to the architects of a new cosmic order. They had been feared, hated, exiled. And yet, they had risen higher than anyone thought possible. "They tried to decide our fate," she whispered to herself, "but in the end we decided everyone." The stars glittered back at her, endless and bright. Somewhere out there, the first joint Terran, Selari exploration fleet was already crossing the space between galaxies. Humanity's story and the galaxy's story was far from over. It had only just begun. And so, the tale that started with a vote to exile Earth ended with something far greater: a choice. Humanity had chosen not to seek revenge but to build a future. The galaxy had chosen not to fear them but to walk beside them. And together, they had proven a truth older than any empire. You can try to cast humanity out. You can try to silence them, to limit them, to erase them. But they will always rise. And when they do, they will lift the universe with them.